Hey folks, this is Waylon Lewis of elephantjournal.com. We do a lot of interviews with like politicians and spiritual people and yogis and environmentalists and weirdos and activists and all over the map. But I also run a writing school called Elephant Academy, and we host thousands of writers on Elephant Journal. As our mission is to share people's stories and their voices and all that good stuff to be a benefit to our world. And we have a writer who has been writing on Elephant, who is amazing, incredibly powerful, unique, and yet accessible voice. I wanted to talk about being a writer in 2023 because it's super confusing. Basically, Facebook and all of social media became sort of anti anyone, like starting a business, sharing stuff, being a writer, all that. About 7 years ago, the landscape shifted. So how the heck do you write in an accessible way that isn't clickbaity?
I'm coming at you live from my house here in Tulsa. Got a little artwork behind me here. Got a little remembrance of New York City and a little bit of LA, both cities I've lived in.
Yeah, you wrote about leaving New York. That was
New York we'll get into. Lots to talk about.
Right. So happy to meet you. So you have an article that I think I don't even ever have to Google. Is on Elephant. Yeah. Titled something about your soulmate isn't who you think it is.
Yes. My very first Elephant Journal post many moons ago.
Yeah, and I think that started on Good Men Project. We had a partnership with them at the time, and we're still partnering and friends with them.
Indeed.
All these years later. But I never even have to Google it because it's always just like I type it into the bar and it pops up because it's never far away from something we're always sharing and resharing. Not just because it does well, which it does, but because it's a great message.
Thank you.
So that is to say, and I looked at the date of that article.
Yeah.
And it's like 2012.
A few weeks ago. A little while ago.
So, and then recently, I feel like you came back to Elephant and been writing Up a Storm again. And
True.
I was reading an article, I think, about you leaving New York.
That's the latest one, yes. How I got everything I ever wanted by walking away from everything I ever wanted.
Yeah. So wait, say that one more time. It was fading out for some reason.
How I got everything I ever wanted by walking away from everything I ever wanted.
So that's the first thing I want to talk to you about. I already introed that I want to talk to you about being a writer and, how to be a writer in 2023. And this is one of the things I love about you. I feel like Michael Pollan, Malcolm Gladwell, Elizabeth Gilbert. There's like Margaret Rankle is a recent one who I love. But you have this voice like those folks who I just mentioned. Everyone has very different voices. My point isn't you have the same kind of voice. My point is your voice is incredibly powerful, number one, but also accessible. So how the heck do you do that? That combination of like, it cuts through all the noise, but it's also weirdly simple. Like those titles are get through, but they're simple.
Yeah, well, I think there's a few things that I've picked up along the way. One is I've been working in advertising for 20 years. That's sort of my day job in writing. So our job is to kind of, what can you do in 5 to 10 words? It's really going to stop people from, when I got started, it was all about magazine ads and television spots. And your job as someone flipping through the newspaper, the magazine, is how do you get them to stop? Oh, what was that? That was interesting. And, if you can do that with a headline, you've really done something.
But how, I feel like advertising, I know a ton of successful advertising types in Boulder, Colorado.
Sure, yeah. They're very, very popular ad town.
Yeah, and they're good at what they do, but at the same time, often advertising messages are off-putting, Sure. We're so trained as like citizens of capitalism to kind of like want to resist some of that crap. Your articles don't feel, I would never accuse them of clickbait, and that is actually quite a compliment because they're very simple and they grab the heck out of you. They grab your collar.
Well, thank you. I mean, I try to, I took the advice of like, don't try to write to thousands, try to write to one person, and maybe try to write to a younger version of yourself. So it's funny, I've got a new article that I'm working on right now titled, Why Your Next Relationship Might Not Work Out Either. And it's not a lecture to other people. It's a lecture to a younger version of myself because I didn't take off, it's about kind of, did you take enough time off in between that last one before you threw yourself headlong into another one? But I find if I could just spend the rest of my life giving advice to my former self, I think I'll have enough material to just fill a whole lot of articles and books.
Yeah, so this is a high compliment, and it's not flattery, and I'll make it clear why it's not, is, I'm a successful writer. I have a couple books. I have a website, Elephant. I write, a million articles, some of which do really well.
Yeah.
And yet I struggle so hard with like titles. Like I just did this interview with this lady. It wasn't an article that I wrote, but it was an interview with this lady. I do interviews like with yourself, like all the time. And then I go to title them and I'm like, Waylon talks with Angie Cho about feng shui. And you're like, no one wants to read that. But the interest I had, which is where I try to title it, like what's the core interest, is, in feng shui and how it can like revolutionize your understanding of space in your home. But using that as an example, which is a little unfair to you because you're not inside of the article or the conversation. Yeah. But how do you title something when like the literal title is so boring, but the heart of your interest is really interesting?
Yeah, I often start with the title, which sounds, only because I have to start with a premise.
Right.
Like what's the, and I think it's not going to be terribly interesting unless it's a little bit contrarian to what the rest of the world is thinking.
That's a lot of your titles have that. There's like a tension when I teach titling. Yeah. I mean, I teach it and I still feel, in case anyone out there thinks anyone has it figured out, like I teach this stuff and I feel like I suck at it. There's a tension or a contradiction inherent in the premise.
Yeah, I think, what's going to, we're not going to be really drawn to something that already tells us something we already know. We're sort of drawn by like, oh, that seems different. How are they going to support that point of view? Like, oh, wait, how are they advancing this argument? Then you got to get at that tension. And I think, advertising teaches you to do that a lot. What is this sort of disruptive thought that's an original thought that doesn't remind us of something we've heard a million times before? Even one of my other recent articles, the real reason why men date younger women, which has gotten a little controversy, but a lot of views. Is I hear a lot of theories about what men are looking for, and from what I've seen in myself and other men, it's for another reason, and not an innocent one. It's an article that's squarely critical of male egos.
I mean, the delight in that article, the title presents something obviously very almost like Bravo reality, like scandalous. You want to read it, it grips you, but then you read it and your voice and where you're coming from is actually highly reasonable and surprisingly like fair to your friend who is like a bombshell but not a kid but is
well, and that was kind of inspired by me wanting to, she found herself in adopting a very pessimistic attitude about her romantic prospects, and I was like, no. Here's another way to view it. And don't worry, it's not about your looks. It's about something else. And don't worry, you're quite charming, and that's not the problem. But regardless of that article, I think you always, if you're trying to put something out there that's going to get attention and get views, it's got to come from a different point of view than one we've already heard a lot of times. So I would sort of start there. I wonder if I can do this real quickly, just as in terms of process. So you noted that sometimes I write for a while and then I seem to go away and then I come back. And partially it's because I'm just overwhelmed with either advertising or working on this book I've been on for now. But I don't know if the rest of you keep notes in your phone, but this is a notes folder of all of my upcoming article ideas. I'm just going to keep scrolling. This is about 60 article premises here. I don't know if you can even see it.
Looks like you have a lot of notes below it's not just a subject or a title.
So each one is a title, and then here's sort of my rough thoughts, and then I'll turn that into another. But I counted them up recently, and I think it's 62. I've put out about 5 or 6 recently. So I also think like best way to get 1 or 2 great articles is start with about 20, just the premise. You don't have to write the whole thing. And if a week later that premise still seems compelling to you, then maybe go back to it. Some of them, you'll have a couple of whiskeys in the bar one night and be like, oh, this is a great idea. I'm going to enter it in my phone. And the next morning, like, it's a little generic. I've heard somebody argue this point before. So I think,
Mark,
go ahead.
You mentioned your book. I want to get into that in a second, and
Sure.
I want people to learn about that. In terms of being a writer in 2023, it's not just articles or titles, obviously. It's also like, how do you share it? Because obviously we're kind of masters of that historically, but it's a new world where Facebook kind of kills links. Instagram doesn't even have links unless you count the link in bio, which is like, most people are like, get angry, honestly, when we share articles and they're like, what, we have to click something? So in terms of being a writer, I mean, you just wrote a book. How do you find a way to go forward? Writing on different platforms, how do you share it? Any of that stuff would be helpful.
It's funny. I mean, I think it's an ever evolving conundrum, and every year or two. I mean, it used to be, for example, back in the era of that one article we started out talking about, your soulmate isn't who you think it is. That got 1.5 million views pretty quickly, because that was back in the day where Facebook didn't suppress anything. If people wanted to share it, it would just go wildfire. And it's a lot harder to get those numbers these days, especially on Facebook, where so many people have left. And then you go over to Instagram, and as you mentioned, and there's a lot more eyeballs on there, but it's not as easy to share a link. You got to do a couple of extra steps, and I got to go to your main page, you click the bio.
And more importantly, it's fine if it's hard for us to share a link, but for the reader, they inherently it's structured to discourage people from leaving the app, which is the same as Facebook. So, we'll get a couple thousand readers usually when we share a big article at best. That's like at best. Right. And a couple thousand readers for a site like Elephant is like, that's like feeding an elephant a crumb and saying, you good?
I think, I've been a little late to the TikTok movement. And of course, we live under this threat of like, is it going to get taken away? Are they going to, with this involvement with China? But I think it's, it's moving. The phone has made things a lot more intimate and a lot more visual. And I think things are going a lot more video oriented. So for about a year, I was sort of teasing a lot of my articles with just a quote in a static image, and they were getting some interaction. And now I've gone more to just a self-hold video of me talking from the heart about what this article means to me. And I think that's a little more in line with this sort of modern practices. And I think people get a sense of your personality, and it's a little more, it's a little more real and authentic. So I think I think we can all probably learn something from that. As other author friends of mine are all kind of flocking to Substack and citing the importance of building your own email list, and so that you're sending out your articles, each week in a Substack blast. I haven't done that yet. Does that mean I leave Elephant Journal? I don't want to leave my friends at Elephant Journal. I can't quit you guys. So I think it's something we have to kind of constantly study. And I think I put more effort into writing my pieces than promoting them. And ironically, I work in advertising, but I come up with in the advertising world, I come up with the ideas. I don't spread them. That's the media department's job. They push them out there. It's my job just to bake a nice little cake, and I hope you enjoy it.
Well, I think that's why Elephant, which isn't exactly my question, which is how can writers survive and thrive and share in 2023 with the changes in social media. But I think that's why Elephant has survived is, we still have like 13 million fans on social, and we do the work. Like I pay a team of people to share your stuff up. So you can, the premise being like, okay, you write 10 articles, 9 of them might be forgotten and small. One of them is still going to hit and deliver. And we offer links. We don't spread links by Facebook. So if there's links to your book or whatever. So Substack, I feel like writers are a little bit like a scared mob running from running this way. TikTok, Substack, like Elephant, like Facebook, whatever.
It's very scattered.
Substack, the promise of Substack is that you could build something over time, which is always a positive.
Yeah.
The fear to me is, or the concern is they don't share. If you're on a medium and you don't have an audience and they don't share your stuff up,
Yeah.
it's going to be hard to build it up. But
yeah. Say I was going to mention media. I mean, a year ago or 2 years ago, everyone was saying, forget all these other third-party sites. You got to go to Medium. And now the same people were telling me to go to Medium a year or two are like, it's all about Substack now. So I'm like, well, what's it going to be next year?
Well, I feel like it's starting next year. Like, honestly, a year or two ago, everyone was yelling Substack in my ear, and now I don't hear it anymore. I mean, that's the problem with these tech platforms is they're owned by the man. They want quarterly results.
Yeah.
Like, if Facebook was smart, they'd go right back to the good old days of like, let things go viral. Even if you don't control the virality where it goes, people are going to come back again and again to the town square if they know they can find good stuff. Yeah.
I mean, this sort of, they've kind of changed their paradigm, and you have to pay to promote it now. And whereas it used to just be, hey, we'll give you something really sticky that gets 1 million eyeballs, then you'll run ads off to the side of that, and it should work out for everybody. But now they squelch them. I have a few friends who kind of know the inner workings of how Facebook kind of controls what ends up in your feed and how the algorithms work. And
we do that too. We pay mostly for like our sponsors, partners, but because I have a little bit of a journalist like ethical issue with like paying to promote articles. Yeah. But anyway, so let's talk about your book. I'm a huge fan of, and Nessa, you had a great comment earlier about like just appreciating you, Mark, for the tip about notes. And how you just write all that down, taking the time to slow down when you have a good idea and mark it down.
I irritate my friends constantly. We'll be in the middle of a really lively conversation out in the bar. I'm like, hey, hold on, I got a good thought here. It's just 12 more seconds. Because honestly, I've learned, I'll remember this tomorrow. I won't remember it tomorrow. And you got to grab it really quickly and just beg forgiveness from your friends. But if they want to be friends with a writer, that's what you got to put up with. Ooh, that's something.
I have a sweatshirt that says, "Be careful, or you'll end up in my novel."
Yeah. There we go. Yeah, or in your weekly Elephant Journal post.
Yeah, well, it's true. I mean, it happens. I definitely have that talk with anyone I date. So
my book, you want to hear about that?
Yeah, is this your first book? I feel like you probably
I wrote a romantic comedy, which actually started out as another book a while ago. I have a rite of passage romantic comedy titled "Match Me If You Can," about a 30-year-old bachelor and his divorced 60-year-old mother who agree to play each other's matchmakers for one crazy summer in order.
I love this.
In order to help kickstart each other's stalled romantic lives. So everyone loves the premise. I've had agents on board with the premise. Question is whether or not I've executed it correctly and all that. And I got to draft 5 or 6 or so. And then I got a little distracted. I'm a musician too. I was putting out a new album and trying to do and then I just kind of walked away from it. I know how to fix it now. But before I fixed that, then I started on this next book, which is a memoir. It's a father-son memour.
So this is not fiction. This is your life.
No, this is life story, and it's not an idea I sort of planned or set out to have. It's one that kind of stumbled to me. I stumbled across, and I'll sort of tell you how. My father passed away about 5 years ago. He had a bladder cancer, and he beat it the first time. He beat it the second time, but when it came back the third,
he said in the bit I wrote that he told you about it.
Yeah. And
survived another 50 years.
So we luckily we got a lot more time with my father than we might have had, and some people don't get much time at all. And I'm grateful that my father and I had an opportunity. We kind of drifted apart in my 20s and 30s, and in my late 30s and 40s we kind of got it together again, and I was able to be there with him in the end. But my father and I always had this great connection with cars. And I had this really sort of heartbreaking moment where, once I was home with him visiting in his final week, and he couldn't get out of bed anymore. And he had a to-do list for me, sort of things to do in his final week. And one of them was to take his car out to get it washed and waxed one last time. So that my stepmother could sell it if she wanted after he passed. And he took meticulous care of his cars and all that. And so my dad and I shared a love of music as well. And meanwhile, he couldn't get out of home, but he was listening to John Denver at home. We got him an Alexa, so we could just go, Alexa, please play John Denver, Sunshine on My Shoulders. And so I took the car out for a drive one last time. It was the longest, loneliest drive of my life. I just kicked on my my Alexa, of course, by saying that. And so it was the loneliest drive because I knew my father would never be beside me again. And I went to sort of kind of attempt to commiserate with him and pretend he was beside me by turning my phone on and plugging in, getting Spotify going and playing John Denver. But of course, to connect the phone to a modern car, you got to go through CD, cassette, satellite, nav, XM, Sirius, all the little modes. And when it got to the CD, it stopped and it wouldn't move on and insisted on playing the CD in there. And what came on was the CD that I gave my dad of my latest album a year earlier. And I wasn't even aware he ever really cared about it, or there he was listening to it in his car every single day. And, and my dad was kind of a guy who wasn't big on compliments or sort of verbal approval. But there I sort of had this incredible message that my music meant more to my dad than I ever knew. And so I had this incredibly poignant and emotional moment. I pulled over the side of the road and I was bawling and I was writing about it. I was writing about it in my journal like a month or two later. And I said to myself, Christ, I got so many stories about my dad and I and cars. I could probably write a book about it. And then I went, wait a minute. Yeah. Should I write a book about it? Is that? And I thought for a second, I was like, it's pretty niche. Like that's a narrow little father, son's cars. It's a little, but I was like, well, I'd read that book. If I saw that on the bookshelf going through the airport, that would stop me. I'd be like, give me that. And so I said, well, how many stories do I even have? Let me see if I can get 100 pages. And I got to 200 pages real quick of the first draft. And,
what was your process of getting to 200 pages? Like,
I started first by just me writing out like individual stories, like the time my dad told me about, the Eagles. The time my dad told me about the birds and the bees while driving the cars.
Sort of like Friends episodes, like little...
or just highlight, like, what's an individual story, that I've been... And at first, my first swing at it, I had like 25 stories. I'm like, well, maybe I can get up to 30. That might be enough to fill a book. In the end, after 3 or 4 years of working on it, I remembered 159 stories that my father and I in cars, whether it was just a little joke or him dropping me off at college or dropping me off at high school the first time and teaching me how, talking to me about how to shave. And
so you didn't try to do it chronologically. It was just story.
No, I did. It took a while to figure out. And then I was like, well, how many cars did we have? And then I realized, I was like, good Lord, there was like 25, 29 cars. And then I thought, what if each car is the beginning of a different chapter? That would be a cool way to organize a book. And so I've done that. The problem is some of the cars we had for 30 years and some we only had for 2. So I had to do this. It took me a while to structure it. I had to do this overlapping, like car number 1 enters the family in 1976, but stays till 2001. So, but meanwhile, in 1978, we get another car. So that starts another chapter. It was a bit of a logistical Jenga, puzzle. And it took a while to figure out how I wanted to structure it. But in the end, it's actually fairly chronological. And I'm working with an amazing editor now, Nicola Kraus, who's an incredible book doctor. If you remember the book and then movie, The Nanny Diaries, she is one half of the writing team of The Nanny Diaries, Nicola Kraus, and is now, she still writes books as well, but she's an amazingly insightful book editor. And she's been working with me for the last year or two, helping me thin it down. It lost about 150 pages at one point. She's like, you don't need every story, Mark. You just need the ones that move the narrative forward. And that was a big lesson as well. Like, just because it happened doesn't mean it belongs in your book.
What if it doesn't move the narrative forward, but it's incredibly meaningful to you? Either happy, sad, whatever.
Yeah, no, that became a bit of a problem. Because, I think she sort of said, there was a couple stories where, hey, the overall thrust of the story is kind of 2 men who aren't really connecting, but they eventually get there. And so if, I had a few happier scenes that kind of just interrupt the flow. It's sort of like, if you have Superman trying to save the world and all of a sudden it looks like he's got the world saved halfway through, and like, all right, I think we've seen the whole movie, I'm walking out. And you gotta kind of make it look like the prize is still in jeopardy of the destinations in jeopardy of not being reached.
The narrative thread.
Yeah. And so there's always kind of a tension, like, all right, there's progress, but it's not quite perfect yet until, you get to the end. So I learned to kind of, and then some of them were just kind of great, interesting stories that meant a lot to me, but the reader was like, yeah, that's kind of like that other story. I don't see, this isn't adding depth. It's just another version of, it was meaningful to me. Just because it's meaningful to you as the reader, you as the writer, doesn't mean it'll be meaningful to the reader. So I think that's important.
Tricky though, Mark, because, when you were talking about titles, you almost said the opposite. And, life is full of oppositional truths, but, that you said you're almost writing to yourself. Like if it is interesting or instructive to you, then there's some power there.
Yeah. Well, I think, how do I reconcile that? I think, hopefully, what you're writing to your former self is the opposite of what the former self was thinking at the time. You think your cheese is over here, but somebody's moved your cheese. It's in this part of the labyrinth now. And hey, kid, I got to shake you out of your misunderstandings. So that you go in a different direction. But I think, I think you've got to, we want to keep turning we keep turning the page when we're unsure of what's going to happen, but we care about what will happen. And I think I had a few stories in there that the way she phrased it is, you've let the air out of the balloon. And it's the story is no longer pulling us along. It's kind of lost its momentum, and now it just feels like you're just kind of reciting glory days stories, but they don't really have, they don't advance the narrative flow, and we can't see growth or frustration of the hero's journey.
And do you feel like, there's always, talking about being a writer in 2023 with that theme, the relationship with an editor is so vital.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, is there a discussion there, or do you feel like just like, oh, every time they're right, their experience?
No, I push back on her more than she'd probably want. But I just say, well, why? I don't understand. Here's why that story is meaningful to me.
Yeah.
And she says, well, here's why it made me just start falling asleep.
Uh-huh.
And then I realized, like, oh, I can still keep that story. I just have to remove that part of that 6-page story, and I can solve that. So, I think, finding an editor you believe in is very tricky. By the way, props to Lisa, my current editor at Elephant Journal. I feel like I'm in very good with her. So please pass that along.
Okay, well.
But I think you're within your rights to kind of interview editors, or at least give them a sample. Like, hey, here's 5 pages in my book. What do you see? What would you change? And because it's like finding a therapist in a way. It's a very personal relationship, and I
love that analogy, Mark.
Yeah,
because it is this combination of like, you do have to speak up and sort of disagree for them to know who you are and where you're coming from, but you also have to really trust their wisdom.
Yeah.
But ultimately you have to decide for yourself. There's a Buddhist expression, always trust the principal one. And the principal one is you. You have to ultimately listen to your own inner, your own circumstances best.
Yeah. There's, and then the other sort of the flip side of that is, don't hire a professional editor and pay them money if you're not going to take their advice at least once in a while. So I run into that in the advertising world all the time, where I feel like you come to me looking for ideas and big campaigns and a tagline or a script or a viral idea. You pay me money for them. I give them to you. I work really hard. And then you go, we don't like them. And I'm like, well, then why'd you come to me?
Yeah.
So
I think that's where the trust is. Like, because my editor, who is not famous or anything, she's, sort of my right-hand person on Elephant.
Yeah.
She loves my writing. She loves me. Yeah. I love her. But that doesn't mean that she isn't like, cut this, cut that, highly critical. She cares immensely. And because she loves, there's this trust in me, like she's looking out for me. And then I kind of relax. I'm in her hands. I'm on some level. I accept her wisdom and her cuts.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely, it's a relationship.
Thanks for listening. Hope you're getting a lot out of it. The full conversation is on our indie platform that supports and continues our work, elephantjournal.com/videos. You can subscribe, listen, watch, and participate there. And when you do so, you'll keep these mindful videos and podcasts going. elephantjournal.com/videos. May it be a benefit.